The wind across the Alaskan panhandle in the winter of 1944 was not merely cold, it was a physical force, a relentless predator that howled down from glaciers and screamed across the steel-gray waters of the Inside Passage. This was the forgotten front of World War II. While headlines focused on Normandy and the Pacific Islands, here, the enemy was threefold: the lingering threat of the Japanese Empire, the unforgiving wilderness itself, and the immense, soul-crushing isolation. Following the bloody campaigns to reclaim Attu and Kiska a year earlier, the U.S. military had doubled down on its Alaskan defenses. From the declassified logs of the Alaska Sector Command, we see a territory transformed into a fortress, a network of airfields, naval bases, and remote outposts, all linked by the thinnest of logistical threads maintained almost exclusively by the United States Coast Guard. The price of this security was manpower, a commodity more precious than gold in the vast, empty North. Hello, listener, let me know where you're watching from. And if you don't mind subscribing to the channel and giving it a like, I'd be very pleased as the author. Enjoy listening. The solution to this critical personnel deficit had been authorized by President Roosevelt on November 23, 1942. It was the U.S. Coast Guard Women's Reserve, soon given the acronym SPARS. The name was a clever derivation of the Coast Guard's motto, Semper Paratus, always ready. From its inception, the strategic doctrine behind the SPARS was clear and pragmatic. As stated in recruitment pamphlets of the era, their purpose was to release a man for sea. For every woman who took a desk job, operated a radio, or packed a parachute, a trained Coast Guardsman could be freed from shore duty to serve on a cutter hunting enemy submarines or rescuing downed airmen in the storm-tossed Gulf of Alaska. These women were not envisioned as combatants, but as a strategic force multiplier, a way to double the effective fighting strength of the Coast Guard without doubling its numbers. Their war would be fought not with guns, but with typewriters, radio keys, and relentless competence. The journey to the Alaskan frontier for these women began not in the cold, but in the humid heat of Palm Beach, Florida, the site of the SPARS Primary Training Center. From archival enlistment records, we see a cross-section of America, former secretaries, teachers, store clerks, and college students, all volunteers who had answered the nation's call. Their initial training was a whirlwind of military discipline, Coast Guard history, and specialized instruction. While most women in the military were assigned to established bases within the continental U.S., a directive in late 1943 opened a new, formidable possibility: Alaska. Volunteering was mandatory for this assignment. Personal diaries from the period speak of the intense mixture of fear and patriotic fervor. The women chosen for Alaska were not just capable, they had to demonstrate a psychological resilience deemed essential for survival in a land known for breaking the spirits of seasoned men. The voyage north was an abrupt immersion into the realities of their new world. Boarding troop transports in Seattle, the women were ferried up the Inside Passage, a journey shrouded in wartime secrecy and the persistent Alaskan drizzle. For days, they watched the familiar landscapes of America dissolve, replaced by an endless procession of dark, forest-covered islands and snow-dusted mountains that plunged directly into the sea. One spar, a yeoman named Marjorie Stedman, later recalled in an oral history interview, the water was this incredible deep green, and the silence was enormous, broken only by the ship's engines. We felt like we were sailing off the edge of the map. This was a psychological transition as much as a physical one. They were crossing a liquid frontier, leaving behind the warmth and predictability of home for a role in a theater of war defined by its harsh, primal beauty and its ever-present danger. Their first landfall was typically Ketchikan, headquarters of the Alaskan sector. This was no manicured military post. It was a rough-hewn frontier town built on stilts and wooden trestles over the water, its air thick with the smell of salt, fish, and wet timber. The SPARS, and their crisp uniforms, were an immediate curiosity among the grizzled fishermen, native Tlingit people, and seasoned Coast Guardsmen. This was the logistical heart of the Alaskan war effort, and their arrival was a tangible event. From a once classified Coast Guard report dated March 1944, the Ketchikan commander noted, "The arrival of the initial SPAR detachment has allowed for the immediate transfer of 32 experienced seamen to the Bering Sea Patrol." The mission was no longer an abstraction. These women could see the weary faces of the men they were replacing, men who were now heading out into some of the most dangerous waters on the planet. The war had just become intensely personal. The SPARS were immediately integrated into the nervous system of the Alaska sector. From archived duty rosters, we see they were not given token tasks but were placed in positions of immense operational importance. They became yeomen, meticulously typing and filing the classified correspondence that flowed between command centers. They served as storekeepers in sprawling warehouses, tracking every crate of K rations, every box of .50 caliber ammunition, and every spare engine part that kept the war machine running. A critical contingent was assigned to the district communications office. Here, in a room filled with the constant clatter of teletype machines and the low hum of radio transmitters, they handled the flow of coded messages that directed cutter patrols, coordinated air-sea rescue missions, and tracked the vital Lend-Lease convoys sailing for Vladivostok. Their work was the unseen scaffolding that supported every military action in the territory, a direct and immediate contribution to the strategic posture of the Allies in the North Pacific. Life in the hastily constructed wooden barracks was a study in contrasts. By day, they were integral parts of a military command. By night, they were a small sorority of 75 women surrounded by thousands of men in a wild, isolated land. Initial skepticism was a palpable force. An entry from the diary of SPAR Dorothy G. Tuttle reveals, "The men seem to be waiting for us to fail, to complain about the cold or the mud. We just smile and make sure our work is twice as good as it needs to be." This attitude of quiet determination became their unofficial motto. They faced their unique challenges with organized resolve, holding movie nights in their barracks, organizing dances to boost morale, and forming tight-knit friendships that became their bulwark against the loneliness. They were proving not only that women could handle the jobs, but that they could endure the crushing psychological weight of frontier service, a feat many men struggled with. The technology they mastered was the lifeline of the Alaskan front. In the communications center in Ketchikan, SPARS operated the Model 15 teletypewriter, a rugged, mechanical beast that translated typed messages into electrical pulses sent over hundreds of miles of wire. An intercepted message had to be correctly decoded, retyped onto the machine, and transmitted without error. A single mistake could send a patrol to the wrong coordinates or misdirect a supply shipment. We can analyze this as a critical human-machine interface. The reliability of the entire command network depended on the focus and precision of these women. Furthermore, some SPARS were trained as radio operators, listening through static for faint signals from cutters battling storms in the Bering Sea. Their ears were the command's ears, their comm radio procedure a beacon of order amidst the chaos of the northern seas. They were not just using the equipment, they were its masters. The greatest enemy, however, remained the environment itself. The Alaskan winter brought with it the big dark, months where the sun barely skimmed the horizon, and a persistent, chilling rain known as the mizzle soaked everything. From declassified medical reports of the time, we see spikes in what was then called cabin fever, a form of seasonal depression. The SPARS fought this psychological battle with ingenuity. They learned to ski on the surrounding mountains, organized basketball teams, and even published their own mimeographed newsletter, the Ketchikan Cackler, filled with jokes and stories to keep spirits high. One powerful account from a SPARS letter home describes forcing herself to take a walk every day, no matter the weather, just to feel the wind and remind herself of the world outside the barracks walls. This was a tactical battle for their own sanity, a display of human resilience that was as crucial to their mission as any technical skill. The success of the Ketchikan experiment was undeniable. By mid-1944, official commendations flowed back to Coast Guard headquarters in Washington, D.C. A memorandum from the commander of the 17th Naval District, which encompassed Alaska, explicitly requested more SPARS, noting their high efficiency, discipline, and positive effect on morale. The result was an expansion of the program. A new, larger detachment of SPARS was dispatched to the district's primary headquarters in the territorial capital of Juneau. Here, their responsibilities grew. They began working in parachute lofts, painstakingly inspecting and packing the silk canopies that were a pilot's last hope over the unforgiving terrain. Others were assigned to the buoy depots, maintaining the vital navigational aids that guided ships through treacherous fjords. They were no longer a test case, they were now a proven, indispensable asset to the Alaskan defense. The move to Juneau marked a significant escalation in both the scope and sensitivity of the SPARS duties. Unlike the rough-and-tumble port of Ketchikan, Juneau was the seat of territorial government and the nerve center for the 17th Naval District. Here, the women were placed into the heart of the command structure. From a declassified personnel file, we learn of Yeoman 3rd Class Helen Smith, assigned directly to the captain of the port's office. Her duties involved tracking the movements of every military and commercial vessel in the heavily trafficked waters around the capital, a task requiring absolute precision and discretion. Any leak of information could betray patrol schedules or convoy routes to lurking enemy submarines. Other SPARs worked in intelligence, carefully charting weather patterns across the North Pacific, data that was mission-critical for both naval patrols and the pilots flying the perilous route to Siberia. Their placement in these roles was the ultimate vote of confidence from a skeptical naval hierarchy. The economic and logistical impact of their work reverberated far beyond Alaska, reaching the bloody Eastern Front. A key, but often overlooked, aspect of the Alaskan war effort was the Alaska-Siberia air route, ALSIB. From airfields in Alaska, thousands of American-built aircraft, P-39 Airacobras, C-47 transports, were flown by Soviet pilots across the Bering Strait to aid in the fight against Nazi Germany. This massive Lend-Lease operation was a logistical behemoth, and the SPARS were its unassuming facilitators. At command centers in Juneau and Ketchikan, they processed the flight plans, managed the supply inventories for the airfields, and handled the vast streams of communication that kept the air bridge functioning. An archived supply manifest from the period, typed flawlessly by a SPAR storekeeper, details the transfer of hundreds of aircraft spark plugs and winter engine lubricants, small components that ensured these vital warplanes reached the Soviet Union. Their clerical work was a direct contribution to the war against Hitler. The tactical importance of the SPARS was never more apparent than during an air-sea rescue operation. Imagine the scenario. Pieced together from cutter logs and radio transcripts, a PBY Catalina patrol bomber, engines failing, ditches into the frigid waters of the Gulf of Alaska. The distress call is a faint whisper amidst the storm static. In the Juneau Communications Center, a SPAR radio operator, her face illuminated by the green glow of the receiver, strains to hear the coordinates, logging them with a steady hand. The message is passed to a yeoman who types the dispatch order with swift accuracy. Within minutes, the alarm bells ring at the Coast Guard docks, and a cutter, its engines roaring to life, steams out into the gale. The entire rescue chain, from the initial alert to the dispatch of the vessel, was held together by the calm professionalism of these women. They were the first link in a chain that pulled down airmen from a certain death, a critical node in the strategy of preserving highly trained flight crews. Beyond the mechanics of war, the SPARS became the custodians of morale, a force multiplier as powerful as any weapon. One of the most emotionally charged assignments was in the Postal Service. In a dimly lit room, SPARS sorted thousands of letters and packages, the only link between the lonely men on the front and the homes they yearned for. One SPAR, in a letter home, described the silent weight of her duty. You see letters come in day after day for a man, and then one day they stop. Then you see a final, small package of his personal effects going the other way. They handled the joyful announcements of birth and the heart-wrenching Dear John letters. They were the gatekeepers of hope. By ensuring the mail moved swiftly and efficiently, they were waging a direct war against despair, the constant companion of soldiers serving in the desolate Alaskan landscape. This logistical task was, in reality, a deeply human and strategic mission to maintain the fighting spirit of an entire army. The battle for respect was won not in arguments, but through undeniable competence. A powerful anecdote survives from the Juneau Supply Depot, a vast and notoriously disorganized warehouse. The new SPAR storekeepers, led by a sharp woman named Petty Officer and Colby, spent weeks overhauling the chaotic inventory system, implementing a logical card catalog for thousands of spare parts. The depot's manager, a grizzled chief petty officer who had openly scoffed at their arrival, was furious at the changes. One night, an emergency call came in. A cutter with a damaged rudder needed a specific bearing assembly immediately to join a critical patrol. The chief and his men searched frantically for an hour without success. In desperation, he turned to Colby. She calmly walked to her new file system, pulled a card, and led him directly to the part in under 2 minutes. According to witnesses, the chief said nothing, but the next day, his entire demeanor had changed. The SPARS had proven their worth in the most practical terms imaginable. The success model established in Ketchikan and Juneau was soon replicated in one of the most vital and desolate locations in the entire territory, Kodiak. Home to a massive naval air station and submarine base, Kodiak was the forward spear point of American power projecting into the North Pacific. The SPARS sent here were thrust into an even more demanding environment, living in sight of runways launching long-range patrol bombers and docks servicing submarines returning from covert missions. Here, they took on specialized roles in aviation supply, tracking complex engine components for PBY Catalinus and B-24 Liberators. Working under the constant threat of sudden, violent willy-wall winds that could ground all air traffic, their efficiency was a direct component of the base's operational readiness. Their presence in Kodiak signified that the SPARS were no longer considered a support unit, but an integral part of frontline base operations. This service, however, came at a significant personal cost. From the private correspondence held in archival collections, a profound sense of isolation emerges. These women were thousands of miles from home, connected only by the letters they themselves sorted and censored. News from the outside world, especially of family tragedy, was often delayed by weeks. An entry from one SPARS diary, dated December 1944, reads simply, "Got the letter today. My brother Danny was killed at Bastogne. It was written a month ago. I have been sorting mail for a hero and didn't even know he was gone." They bore these silent griefs while maintaining a professional exterior, understanding that their steadfastness was part of their duty. This emotional fortitude, a quiet battle fought in the privacy of their bunks, was as demanding as any physical hardship they faced on the frozen frontier. The end came with the same abruptness as their arrival. On August 14, 1945, the news of Japan's surrender crackled over the very radio and teletype machines the SPARS had so diligently operated. For a moment, the rigid military discipline of the Alaskan bases dissolved into spontaneous, joyous chaos. From oral histories, we hear of sirens wailing, men firing rifles into the air, and the SPARS themselves pouring out of their offices and barracks to cheer alongside the Coast Guardsmen they had served with. But almost as quickly, a new reality set in. The singular purpose that had driven them, the immense global conflict that had given their lives a profound and urgent meaning, was over. The teletypes that had once carried life and death orders began transmitting demobilization schedules. Their war was won, and their mission was rapidly coming to an end. The demobilization of the SPARS was swift and, in many ways, unjust. The entire program was officially terminated on June 30, 1946. The women who had been the backbone of the Coast Guard's shore establishment were honorably discharged and encouraged to return to their former lives. However, in a final, bitter irony, these dedicated volunteers were initially denied the rights and benefits afforded to their male counterparts. They were not considered veterans in the full sense and were excluded from the GI Bill, which provided educational funding, housing loans, and other assistance that became a cornerstone of post-war American prosperity. They had released a man for sea duty, but they would have to fight for decades more to receive the same recognition and gratitude from the nation they had so ably served. Their war against prejudice did not end with VJ Day. The SPARS of the Alaska sector were more than just replacements, they were a strategic advantage. Their flawless execution of vital logistical, communication, and administrative duties enabled the U.S. Coast Guard to project maximum power into the North Pacific at a critical time. These frozen sentinels stood their post, battling not an armed enemy but the tyranny of distance, weather, and isolation. Their story, unearthed from faded duty rosters and private letters, reveals a crucial truth of the war. Victory was built as much on the meticulous work in a remote communications office as it was on the battlefield. In conquering the Alaskan frontier and the skepticism of their peers, these remarkable women proved that patriotism has no gender and that in the coldest of theaters, the spirit of semper paratus, always ready, could burn brighter than ever.